Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. My name is Curtis Lawson with Shepherd Construction Advisors, and along with my industry expert friends, I am here to guide you through these 4 key components of a successful project, which are demonstrated by this simple drawing of a house. The foundation is proper planning. The left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. Have all 4 of these components in place, and your project will succeed. Whether you're building or remodeling a custom home, or if you're an architect or designer looking for inspiration, or maybe you're just interested in building science and high-performance construction, you're in the right place. Please help us further our mission here by tapping that follow or subscribe button, push that notification bell so that you know when our new episodes drop every week. And now, let's get to today's interview. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd Podcast. Today I am joined by my friend Wynne Walker with the Wynne Walker Group. Wynne and I connected a few months back, and I'm actually not sure how I initially got in touch with you, probably through Toner. He seems to be the hub that a lot of us connect through. So anyway, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, so you're with the self-titled Wynne Walker Group.
Right.
Actually sounds like a band, the Wynne Walker Group.
Oh, does it?
Like a 1980s prog rock band or something like that.
Yeah, I thought J.J. Watt was going to sue us because our logo looks just like the J.J. Watt logo. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So tell us what you do, because obviously your company name doesn't tell us what you do. So
yeah,
a lot of people wonder, what do you do?
Sure. Well, we, when I started the business 6 years ago, we started doing technology consulting. So I was an audio video integrator for 18 years and decided to get out of that business as my oldest kid was going to middle school and just needed a different change of lifestyle. I was working too much and just wanted to, work for myself. So I decided to do consulting and act as an owner's rep, really to work on behalf of the homeowners to make sure they got, expectations were met and budgets weren't inflated, and work as an advocate for them versus trying to sell equipment. And so then we did that for about 2 years, and it just has slowly transitioned more into broad-based electrical consulting. So we've tried to take commercial best practices, electrical best practices, and figure out how to apply those to residences. So that's the core part of our business is electrical. We call it electrical architecture.
And you guys also have a separate component to your business too, right? For concierge services.
Correct. Yeah. So we also have a concierge business, and that was a business that we just sort of stumbled into. We had a homeowner ask us for assistance to replace air conditioning in their home. It was an 18,000 square foot home, and he was just lost. He had spent a bunch of money with a couple different companies and was frustrated and trusted us and just said, "Hey, can you help us out?" And we decided to try that out, and it worked, and he loved it. And so one thing led to another, and we were able to start this, concierge property management business. So it's complementary to the electrical consulting, same clientele, but very different.
It's amazing that once you build that trust with somebody, they'll ask you to be more involved in their homes and what they're looking to do.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I had a mentor of mine when I was a kid that would always say, or a young adult, that what we're really selling is trust. Whether you're building homes or doing architecture or doing consulting, it really is all about trust.
Yeah. So on the electrical design side of things, that's not something that typically gets done in residential construction, especially here in our market. Right. Certain markets may be more common, but here we don't really get into that in Houston. I mean, you get like a base set of plans from the architect. If you're lucky, just it may not even be accurate. It may just be like, here's our concept of what the lighting might be, and builder figure it out, right?
No, it's literally the bare minimum. I mean, unfortunately, that's the status quo in the community here, and not just here in Houston, but just by and large across the country. I mean, I do think West Coast, East Coast, of course, they seem like they're leading in some ways, but I think this is an unusual service really anywhere in the country. Of course, commercially, that's best practice. It's not just best practice, it's required.
It's required, yeah.
So, it's sort of shocking to me that the residential industry doesn't have some requirements for MEP engineering. So we're trying to fill that role to say, hey, look, this may not be required, but the status quo, we believe, doesn't work. Not well.
And if it's not done right, it's even more shocking.
Right.
Sorry, I had to work that in there. So why is that? Like, why do we just get this base set of information from an architect or a designer, and then we have to figure it out? Like what's
Well, what's interesting
Yeah.
is I learned in Germany, architects are also engineers. Like they're required to be. It's part of how they go through school. Here in the States, architects and engineers are completely different disciplines. And so, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we depend on our architects to provide engineering, construction documents, and that's not what they do. When we meet with architects and we ask them, "Do you like drawing electrical or lighting plans? What kind of education did you receive? Any education?" And everyone just shakes their head like, "No, like we just we just have to do it. To get a permit, we have to do it, and so that's what we do. But we have no education in it. We don't really like doing it. Some do, but most don't. So yeah, it's really interesting how that's transpired. And then, to make matters worse, then we throw that on the builder and make it, like you said, make it the builder's problem. So I think we were talking about this before the show. I think that, what I would love to see, not just for my business, but just industry wide, I would love to see the pre-planning process and the design process get more attention, whether it's electrical or mechanical or plumbing or whatever that scope is, building science related stuff that y'all talk about on the show. Um, I think we're really doing a disservice to our customers by forcing the builders to have to do a lot of that work. And I think builders and their subcontractors would be more successful if we just as an industry did a better job providing them a clear scope of work.
Yeah, I mean, what problems arise when you don't plan this stuff out? I mean, I'm thinking of things like, I mean, there's the obvious things like the customer wants some feature that's not on the plans. I mean, that's obvious, but I'm also thinking about, when you try to put too much on one circuit, it can cause problems. Or if you try to
Right.
run two wires for two different things, like a low voltage and a 110 wire next to each other, the interference that can cause. I mean, like, what are some
Sure.
other conflicts that arise when that stuff isn't planned out?
I mean, yeah, I mean, the list is a mile long, I mean, of course, but I think, big picture, before we dive into those technical things you brought up, I think, setting expectations for the homeowner is number one, right? Like we all as construction professionals want to make sure that when the homeowner moves in, we've met their expectations. No one wants that buyer's remorse feeling.
Yeah.
So I think, when you don't design early enough in the process, you end up having a kind of a haphazard implementation, which then results in missed opportunities that then results in missed expectations. So I think, a big part of what we do is just making sure the clients are happy when they move in. But yeah, on the technical side, I think, I mean, there's just tons of examples, like you said. I think lighting is a big part of that. Lighting is a huge part of our business. And, when it comes to lighting artwork or making sure clients, as you get older, one thing we've noticed when you're in your 60s or 70s, you need 10 times as much light as you needed when you were 40 or 50.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't understand that. And they're just speccing cans from Home Depot or whatever the local showroom sells. And so, yeah, making sure you have adequate lighting is huge. And, we go into homes all the time where it's just dark. The artwork's not well lit.
Or they're just laying the cans out on the ceiling in just a basic
It's just a grid,
just
yeah.
a grid pattern because it
Yeah.
looks aesthetically pleasing to stand back and look at the ceiling that way, right?
Right.
But it's not really thought through and where that light's going to be cast and what purpose does it serve? What
Right.
are you illuminating?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is things like, one thing that we do was we don't, most electricians are, they're competing on price typically, right? And so they're not going to include things that are extra that's going to drive up their price. So we've sort of, as a community, have sort of forced them to give a lowball estimate because of how we've structured it. Their incentives are not aligned with the homeowners necessarily. I mean, they can be, but typically, at least at the beginning of the project, the builder's just saying, "Hey, give me a price on a scope of work that's vague," and they want to win the work, so they're going to, to some extent, lowball it. Whereas we're saying, "Look, we're not looking at anything really on price. I mean, of course, we're trying to meet a budget, and we don't want to be wasteful of the client's resources. But for example, let's say you have like toner specifies a mechanical system, and the blower needs 110 volts. Well, a normal electrician is just going to run 110. Whatever the spec says, that's what they're going to do. We're going to say, yeah, but wait a minute. We know a lot of these blowers are now going to be 220, right? If you look at Mitsubishi, City Multis and other systems, VRF systems, they have different requirements, and maybe they even need wiring from the outdoor unit to the indoor unit. Maybe that's how they're getting powered.
Right.
And so we're thinking about, well, 10 years down the road, we know the system's probably going to need to be replaced. And at that point in time, will we be able to get wiring to these units or not? In many cases, if it's a one-story house, maybe you can. But in most of these homes we work in, they're complicated, and there is no way to get new wiring to that unit. So we're going to say, well, we're going to specify, well, let's go ahead and run a 220 circuit, and let's size that up to a 30 amp or a 50 amp or whatever we think we need to give the client that extra capacity, so that 10 years down the road, they're not hit with some shocking, bill to rewire the house, or they can't get the equipment they really want, right? They're told,
they just change their mind during the build, and they're like, hey, after the job starts, they're roughing in AC, and they're like, you know what, let's switch to this system. And then the electrician's like, well, that's a change order to go from that 110 to that 220. And and people get change ordered to death over little things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The electrician is, the reason there's change orders because he has no clear scope of work to work from.
Right.
I mean, he gets a very basic electrical plan, a basic lighting plan. Many times there are no specs. There's no specs on outlets. There might be specs on cans.
Yeah.
There's no spec on wiring. There's no spec on breaker panels. You might get an appliance schedule. The appliance schedule is probably not complete, right? So what we find is we show up and we start asking questions. Well, do you want a sauna? Do you have a heated bathtub? Do you have a steam shower? Do you, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we want heated floors. Oh yeah, we didn't,
Do you want just the basic round outlets, or do you want screwless plates, decor type
yeah. So,
devices?
I think what we bring to that table early on is we bring all of those products that are available and just present them as options to the homeowner, right? The homeowner is always driving the ship. I mean, it's their home, their choice, but we want to give them information as early as possible so they can make those decisions.
One of the things that you have on your website that I like a lot is a little graphic that shows that well-defined projects typically cost, I think you said like 17% less. Or sorry, 17% less.
Or more. So 17% more.
And then poorly defined projects cost like 70% more. Anyway.
Correct. Yeah.
Basically saying whatever the percentage is, that a poorly defined project is going to cost you more money in the long run.
100%.
And a well-planned project is going to save you money.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that study was done about a decade ago, and it was done across the country, mainly looking at commercial institutional buildings. It wasn't residential necessarily. But, the point still stands. Yeah. That what they discovered was that a well-defined project, like you said, is 10% less. Poorly defined project is about 17% more. So that delta is 37%. That's massive. Even if you only just looked at the smallest number, the 10%, even if that was your only gain, I mean, that's a lot of money. And the other thing I would say is, for the types of customers we typically work with, again, they want to save money. No one wants to waste money. But I think maybe even more important than saving the money is the expectations, right? Is the having a good experience. No one wants to go build a home and have a negative experience. It's already, building a home is stressful, no matter how much planning you do.
Yeah.
And so we want to minimize as many change orders, as many hiccups along the way to, make the process as pleasant as possible for the homeowner. Having a well-defined scope is important.
And those people also just want to spend their money wisely. I mean, even ultra wealthy people don't want to just throw money down the drain on a product that's not a good product, or not a good fit for their project. They want to specify the right things, have good quality from the beginning. So, I mean, that's one of the big things for builders who are transitioning, or builders who are, at least that I see, builders who are used to operating in one price range, then they're trying to step up to the next price range. They don't really have a concept of what that next price range expects for a level of quality, a level of product. So they try to apply the same products that they used in a $1 million house to a $5 million house, and those products don't always equate.
Sure. Yeah, the products and the subs as well, right? Subs don't always equate either. So yeah, I agree with that.
So on the electrical planning side, I assume that you guys are looking not only at just the electrical wiring, but also kind of how that plays with the other components that require electrical. So HVAC, low voltage, I would assume like outdoor, like landscape lighting, like all that kind of stuff,
Correct.
Right? You guys look at the big picture.
Yeah, literally. I mean, if it has power, we design it. So whether it's high voltage, low voltage, solar generators, whatever's involved, if it has power, we want to manage that part of the scope. I think one thing that we bring to the table is, we want the accountability. We want to be that one neck to choke when it comes to the electrical scope. And right now, what happens is there's a dozen different people in that scope, cooks in the kitchen, right? You've got the homeowner and the builder and the electrician and the lighting showroom and the architect and the interior designer and the landscape lighting guy. And it just goes, the list goes on and on and on. So, what we're saying is, hey, this is haphazard. Let's take all of that and roll it into one person, one company that can manage that and be accountable for that. So when there's a question, like you said, these homes have become electrical wise very integrated. You can't, if you make one change here, it may change 2 or 3 other things. So we have to be very mindful of that. And if you have 10 different people managing that scope, a lot of times that information flow just doesn't happen. And all of a sudden something changes on one side and then someone else doesn't find out and you end up with finger pointing. So we want to eliminate finger pointing and have that accountability.
One of the other things that you say on your website that I loved, and by the way, your website's full of great little nuggets of wisdom throughout, so good job on that. One of the things that I liked said, like, the quality of a home can't be, I actually saved it here on my computer because I couldn't remember, the quality of a home cannot be derived by appearance alone. So I think that's a fantastic quote, and a lot of the quality that goes into construction, people never actually get to see on a daily basis. And I think people struggle sometimes with spending money on things that they can't see or get direct enjoyment from. At least they think they're not getting direct enjoyment from it, right?
Sure.
But so many of those things that are behind the walls really affect their day-to-day life. So when we talk about, back to lighting, for example, I mean, quality of lighting can affect your health, your mood. There's a lot that goes into the health science behind lighting.
Yeah, and what's interesting about lighting is sometimes people will have a room and they just don't like being in it, but they're not sure why. And I think a lot of times it's lighting. If you are in a room that has a lot of glare, you may not immediately pick up on it, but it's fatiguing and you don't want to be in that space. And unfortunately, almost all the cheap lights have tremendous glare. I mean, you look up and you're looking right into the light source. So as a lighting designer, we always want to hide that light source. You don't want to ever see it. It's tough because a lot of what we do, almost all what we do is hidden. Maybe lighting isn't hidden, but most of what we do is. So it can be a tough sell to some customers because you don't see it, but it definitely has a long-term impact, like you said, on the enjoyment of the home and health as well. Yeah.
When people are talking about budgets with me and where people are trying to understand where costs are coming from, they're like, oh, I'll just choose some cheaper countertops or some cheaper tile and get the budget down, right? And that might get the budget down a very small percentage, right? But the big portion of their construction budget's actually going into those things that you can see.
Yeah.
The foundation, the framing, the electrical, the HVAC, all that, those are the big ticket items, not what countertops you pick.
Right. I always sort of chuckle when I go in and I see a, $100,000 Gaggenau range or Wolf range or something that, probably doesn't get used all that often in some of these homes. And then, but they, so they're willing to, spend the money on that, but sometimes cut corners on electrical or other things that I think are higher impact, lighting control, for example. So yeah, it's interesting how people want to try to value engineer things, but I love that quote. It's a great quote.
So one of the things that kind of ties into this too is kind of the need for designing and thinking through this stuff before you start construction is just kind of the complexity of things, the complexity of today's homes. It's not like a home. I mean, so even a very large, expensive home 20, 30, 50 years ago really wasn't that complex to operate. Maybe you had some complicated lighting, but in general, they were not super complex structures mechanically. But now even a small to mid-size home today can be very complex, kind of behind the scenes. And so, and especially when we step up into these 5, 10, 15, 20,000 square foot estate type of, I mean, you're basically operating a commercial structure.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And so having all of those components coordinated is super important because they all play together, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I will say on the technology side of things, we know when home automation was still sort of a new thing and brands like Crestron were on the scene, they still are, but they were very popular. At that time, it was, everyone wanted to really tightly integrate everything, right? They wanted this one control pad. It would control the pool and the lights and the mechanical and everything. And that's, people still do that today, but we actually are more of a proponent of not doing that. And I think, people today have 200-300 apps on their phone. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so people are used to having a lot of apps on their phone. And so I think sometimes keeping it simple is better, right? I mean, yes, there's a ton of integration, there's a ton of overlap between these scopes, but there's no reason to overly complicate it if you don't have to. And so that is a fine line we walk when we're doing design work is, knowing the client, knowing expectations, and doing it in a way that is easy and simple to use, but it's also reliable. So we just find that the more you integrate things, the more chances for failure you end up having over the long run. So it's just something to be mindful of.
Yeah. And people don't necessarily know if something gets disconnected from that system or something goes wrong, maybe the average homeowner can't just kind of reprogram it themselves. They've got to call somebody or bring somebody else to come in and fix
Right.
it for them, right? Is that part of what you guys do through your concierge service or even through your electrical and your design service? I mean, do you guys handle kind of when these things start to get off track, going in and maintaining them, reprogramming them, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, on the audio video side, whoever the audio video contractor is, they're going to be the ones providing the support for that system. Some of our homeowners just prefer to reach out to us and then we coordinate that. So it sort of depends. Of course, if we're doing our concierge service, then we're the single point of contact for everything on the home.
Mm.
So yes, we would triage that issue if they call and say, hey, the TV's not working or the network's not working. We would try to troubleshoot that remotely. If we can't resolve it, go on site. And if we can't resolve it on site, then we would escalate that to the audio video guy. But at the end of the day, they still install that and service that. So as a consultant, we sort of bridging this gap, this gray area where we do consulting, but we also do some procurement. So we actually and we offer it as a service to provide the light fixtures and the lighting control system. And the reason that kind of came about, we didn't initially want to do that, but the lighting scope has become a very complicated scope. And as soon as it goes out to a local lighting showroom, it can get messed up very quickly because they're just not familiar with brands that we're specifying or what the details of the design are. So we have sort of ventured into that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to support after the homeowner moves in, if we're doing concierge, we're supporting everything. If we did lighting, we'll support that. Otherwise, the AV guy does everything else. But even for our customers that are not on concierge plans, because we've earned their trust, like we talked about earlier, they end up just calling us whenever there's anything wrong, which is fine with us. We're happy to help.
Yeah. The concierge stuff, I think is fascinating. I would assume that's more geared toward high net worth or larger estate homes. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
or is it a variety of price ranges and people are using that service?
I think that, I think the niche is the one step down from the families that have full-time staff.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, if you've got 5 or 6 people on staff, you probably don't need our service. But if you're that one rung down, that you're still, you're probably a next door neighbor to one of those people.
Yeah.
But you don't really like having a bunch of staff around. But you want to have the same experience, so that's what we're we're kind of a fractional house manager service. So we're giving them the experience of having that full-time staff, but without the expense, without the hassle. Most people just don't want to have an employee on the payroll
right.
to manage the house. But to your point, they are like commercial structures. So they really do need someone that's looking out for the structure, for everything, right? And that can tie all those, tie everything together. So
yeah, we've touched on maintenance many times in past episodes with some handyman services and some builders who offer those types of services. But we've talked about how there's always something to maintain, especially on a large house. But so many of those things get overlooked until there's a failure.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. Yeah. And our service is, I feel like, pretty unique. So, it's complementary to some of the handyman services. We're not a handyman service. That's not what we do.
But you schedule it.
We do schedule it. And we do some very basic handyman stuff internally.
Yeah.
But we're really, we're trying to give them this concierge experience, right? You go to the Ritz-Carlton, you've got that concierge downstairs that'll help you with anything. And we're doing the same thing, right? The clients can text us 24/7, no matter what the problem is. We don't get into the executive assistant type of side of things where that starts to be a gray area. Like, hey, can you take my kids to school? Can you get my car washed? Get the oil changed. We do some of that. Sometimes clients call and say, we had a client a couple weeks ago say, hey, my bike needs a tune-up. Can you take it to the shop and get the bike tuned up? And we're like, okay, sure. We threw it in the pickup truck and took it over there and got tuned up. And he was thrilled, right? That he didn't have to waste his time to go do that. So sometimes we do things that are unrelated to the property. And that's fine, but we really try to stay focused on the property itself.
I mean, if someone is having like a big party or event there, I mean, do you guys get involved in like schedule the tent, like the tent rental and the chairs?
We definitely can, and yeah, and we're there to help, and we're there for all those parties. But I would say most of the time they've hired an event planner,
yeah,
and so they're sort of running the show. But we're a contact for that event planner to make sure there's electrical ready to go for the band, and all those things are taken care of. So we're on call for all those parties.
Yeah, I think a lot of those folks tend to have maybe 2 or 3 different properties, maybe in different states, and so they want to kind of know that when they leave to go to Colorado for the summer, that they're going to come home and the house is going to be ready to go.
That's right.
When they get back home, or
I mean, I would say one of the services our clients love the most is getting projects done when they're gone. Right, when they're out of town, here's a list, a honey-do list, right, and they come back and it's all done. It's great. I mean, it's awesome. It's better for everybody.
So you guys would kind of manage that process. So if they're like, hey, well, we're in Colorado this summer, we want to get the powder bath redone, then you would coordinate with a contractor or designer or whatever.
I mean, we actually will act as a GC when it comes to those smaller projects.
Okay.
There's really not a reason to involve another GC.
Yeah.
Just an extra cost. So we do projects, right? We built tennis courts, we've done remodels, we do painting and wood floors. I mean, whatever needs to be done.
Okay.
We're probably not going to do a full renovation. But we do, yeah. I mean, if the client's out of town, last summer we did repainted an entire house and refinished all the wood floors for a homeowner. And, those are big projects. You don't want to do those things when you're home.
Yeah. Well, that involves moving all their stuff out.
All the furniture has to get
protecting all their stuff. It has to be protected.
Yep.
And
yeah, it's a big deal.
Backing up just to kind of back to our previous topic about planning projects. I wanted to talk about how early in the process, well, I want to kind of go back and talk about planning.
Sure.
Right. And talking about how early in the process, you guys like to get involved, should get involved, and just kind of talk about the benefits of having all this stuff talked about early. So,
yeah.
First question is like, how early in the design process with the architect and the homeowner and the builder do you like to step in?
So I would say, the perfect time for us is an architect has 3 basic phases. They have schematic design, design development, and then construction documents.
Yep.
So for us, we want to get involved right at the beginning of DD. That's a perfect time. SD is still a little too early.
Yep.
It's, they're still moving walls around. The square footages may be changing. It's still too conceptual. And we've gotten involved that early and just realized that it's, while I love that they're calling us that early, it's a little too early. There's not a lot we can do. We need the bones, the structure to be settled on.
But DD is when they're starting to talk about elevations, interior elevations, and some of the base electrical stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah. Interior elevations are starting up, selections are being made as far as appliances, mechanicals getting looped in. So that's the perfect time, right around DD. We get involved late. We get called a lot where it's like, hey, with the slabs poured, can you come help? And it's like, well, sure. Yeah, we can do that, but that's not ideal, right? I mean, anytime we have to rush, we're not going to be as good as we would if we had ample time.
Because if you're getting called after a slab's poured, I mean, there's a contract in place, things are permitted. It's,
Well, and we were talking about this earlier as far as budgets, right? I mean, we would prefer to be involved early enough to give the client to help coach them on what these things cost. If we're getting involved at slab, the builder's already got an allowance for electrical and lighting and all this stuff. And then we come in and we can be viewed as being disruptive, right? Because, we explain, no one's told the client all these things they can do or have. And then we do that and present it. And they're like, oh, wow, well, I want that. No one told me that I could have that. But it's twice as expensive as what the builder's allowance was. And so, getting involved before allowances are set is ideal. It just depends, though. Sometimes the clients hired the builder before they hired the architect, and that's already been established. I mean, we don't have a lot of control over that. But a big part of our process during design is setting expectations as far as allowances goes. So DD's, perfect time. We can get involved late if we have to, but prefer not to.
Again, I've said this many times, but the more people that we can have at the table early on is just setting the client up for success, right? I mean,
well, like your analogy of the house, right? I mean, building the team, the planning and the team is one of the walls, right? So,
right,
that's really important.
On projects that I'm a consultant on, I don't like coming in after that process either, because like you said, I'm viewed as disruptive. I mean, who's this guy coming in now and telling us to change the way we're doing things?
Right.
I don't want to be disruptive. I want to be part of the team and help everybody succeed, because I think what people don't think about, what maybe the builders, architects don't think about is, I'm not coming in to go against you. I'm help. If I'm doing my job and we're working together, it's actually benefiting you as the builder and you as the architect, because it's as adding a layer of client satisfaction.
Right.
But also just a layer of backup and protection. So
yeah, I think it's tough because anytime, like even in your relationship as a consultant, you're sort of challenging the status quo. And I think anytime we do that, people will get their feathers ruffled a little. It's like, well, we haven't done it that way before. And so we deal with that a lot, right? I mean, again, in the residential world, electrical consulting doesn't really exist. So just doing that at all is disruptive. And so we deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
Well, the worst thing is, I've been doing this for 40 years and you can't come in here and tell me how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. We hear that all the time. But so initially I think builders are, resistive because like, we haven't done this before. But once they realize they don't have to do any project management, right? Like all of a sudden the scope's been defined. We have something to hold our electrician accountable to. And Wynn's going to be here if there's ever any question about what to do. Most of our builders we work with, they're used to being very involved in electrical scope, having to call the lighting showroom and coordinate fixtures and deal with all the questions. And every time there's an issue, they're dealing with it. When we're on a job, they don't do any of that. They're not involved in the electrical scope very much, other than just very high level.
Some scheduling, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a huge burden off their plate. It saves them a ton of time.
So if somebody was working with you, if a builder was working with you, when it came time for electrical rough-in, right? Are they going to call you and say, hey, Wynne, we're ready to go? Would you then kind of schedule the electrician, work with the electrician, come out and do site inspections of what they're doing? Or
we're not going to schedule the electrician, but we are going to be there on site, daily, weekly, whatever's necessary to make sure all of his questions are answered and to do as-builts, right? The other thing is these are custom homes. Nothing, even as much detail as we put into our plans, things change. Clients make decisions, let's move the bathtub here. Let's rearrange this. I mean, stuff just happens. And so we need to be there to support the project as those changes occur and incorporate those changes back into our documents. So at the end of the job, it's not like an architect's electrical plan that probably is most of the time not representative of what actually got built, right?
Right.
I mean, our plans are precise. Every outlet, every device is represented on there exactly how it got built. And the other thing is, we're telling the electrician like how to wire the outlets. So again, like most electrical plans from an architect, it just shows symbols on a plan. These are the outlets. It's up to the electrician to decide how he wants to wire those.
Right.
But a lot of times, and I think we touched on this earlier, that can be a mistake, right? Like maybe the electrician, the guy that happened to be on site that's doing the installation, that's never met the homeowner, never met the builder, the architect, he doesn't know anything about what the expectations are of the client. So he's 10 steps removed, but he decides that the outlet inside the master bedroom and the outlet right outside the master bedroom, well, that's easy. So I'm just going to wire those together.
Circuit, yeah.
Same circuit. Like that's, saves me a ton of time. So we don't do that. We don't let them make those decisions in the field. We collaborate with them before construction starts to make sure that all that wiring is predetermined so that those mistakes don't happen. And we don't have GFCI outlets for tripping inside outlets and all that stuff.
We're on a remodel project right now, and the homeowner could not, his master bathroom GFCI tripped. He could not figure out where to reset it. And this was, 4 months before we started the project. And I was just over there one day talking to him about his design. And he was complaining that his master bathroom receptacles have been out for like 2 or 3 months. He's like, I just can't find this GFCI reset. I've looked in every other bathroom. I've looked in the kitchen. I've gone to the panel. It's nowhere to be found. And I'm like, huh. And so me and my electrician start hunting around, and we found his GFCI reset in the garage apartment bathroom, which was not even connected to the. Who knows why it was wired that way to begin with? But this was a 20-year-old home in West U, and nobody knew how to reset it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and unfortunately, that happens even in brand new homes, right? Yeah. I mean, weird things can happen because somebody decided to kind of take the easy route. So yeah, we see that all the time. And so those are things we're trying to mitigate, like, organizing the breakers in a organized fashion and making sure the branch circuits are, grouped together in a logical fashion. We don't do GFCI outlets locally anymore. All of those are in the breakers.
The breaker box, yeah.
So it's so you could argue it's a little more inconvenient if it does trip. Well, I got to walk to the garage or wherever the panel is and reset it. But, a lot of times those GFCI outlets are hidden, sometimes they're visible, but a lot of times they're
inside a cabinet, inside a closet.
Inside a cabinet, you never know where they are. And so it's, that's not great either. So, we just prefer to kind of have everything in one central location.
I had somebody argue with me about that pretty recently. We wired their house the same way with the GFCI, was all in the breakers. And the homeowner argued, they're like, we want GFCI outlets in the bathroom. I'm like, well, why? Because when they trip, I just want to be able to push a button. I'm like, well, they shouldn't really be tripping unless there's some kind of problem going on.
Yeah.
But they just demanded it. So we ended up pulling the breaker, swapping it out, and going back to the outlets. But,
well, yeah, I mean, it's an easy swap, right? It's not a big deal if someone wants that. But we have not had that happen yet. I'm sure someday it will. But
so on the as-builts that you mentioned, you talked about how you guys like to go in after the house is wired and update the plans with the as-builts. And I've seen a lot of contractors, architects, to just do photo documentation, which is what we do, which I think is very important.
Yeah,
it's super important to have photos or video of what's inside your walls so you can see that in the future. But most people don't go to the hassle, the time to update the electrical drawings for as-builts.
Yeah.
But that could definitely come in very helpful, let's say, down the road if you want to add a load to the house or in this area, like like how the house has been wired, like
right.
how it's been set up. And there's no question about, can this handle that based on what other rooms might be attached to this?
Yeah, I mean, again, we kind of have to do it because we're doing the branch circuit documentation. So a branch circuit is just, the wiring that goes from the breaker to the outlets or to the devices that are on that breaker. That's what we call a branch circuit. So because most jobs, those are not defined, you can just willy-nilly do whatever you want. It doesn't matter if the plans get updated, but ours, are labeled on the plan. It'll show the outlets in the kitchen group together and it'll say, this is going to panel 3, breaker 26. And if that changes, or if that load changes, then we have to update that in our schedule to reflect that load change, because it could change the balance of power within the panel or, whatever. So we do it because we think it's the right thing to do, but we kind of also have to do it because the level of documentation, level of detail we've gone to, which is just different than, how residential is typically treated.
Slightly off topic here, but what do you think about the newer panels that are on the market right now that allow you to, there's an app where you can actually view the loads and your usage and all that stuff. Do you use those? What do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think most of the time we don't use those. I mean, the only time we would use a panel like a span panel is if you have solar. So the span can be a really good option for that. It uses, it's got relays that are built into the panel behind the breakers. So it uses standard Home Depot breakers, which is great. They're not proprietary. It gives the homeowner insight into, how much power is being used, how the solar is performing, how the batteries are performing. We don't do a lot of solar. Most of the homes we're on, for whatever reason, clients just aren't interested in it.
They're all oil and gas people.
Yeah, they're oil and gas. And I wish they did do solar more. We have a lot of homes that would, they got great roofs for it, flat roofs. It would be awesome for solar, but we just don't get that opportunity. So yeah, I mean, the span panel is a good panel for solar. We do like to specify a brand called Leviton for our breaker panels.
Mm-hmm.
They are white instead of gray, so they blend in a residence a little better. They have a nice little plexiglass door so you can see the breakers.
That's their newer panel. It's not new, but it's been a few years now.
It's been out 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years.
Yeah, that's a slick looking panel.
Yeah, it just looks nice. It's high quality. The other thing that is probably the main reason we specify it is because on most breaker panels, all of the hot wiring terminates onto the breaker itself. The Leviton does it a little differently. They have a bus bar, which is just a metal strip with screws in it, and all the hots go onto that. So when you go to install the breaker, it just literally snaps in. I mean, a homeowner could swap out a breaker on a Leviton panel. There's no wiring, no tools, nothing required. We like that. And we like it because we want to move up as much work in the construction process as early in the process as possible. So what it allows the electrician to do is when he's roughing in the house, he can also terminate all those hot wires before sheetrock, which is another huge added benefit because we've been so detailed on where every wire has a home. We want to verify that wire got landed in the right spot before sheetrock. So that gives us the ability to do that. With a regular panel, they just leave the Romexes coiled up and they don't touch them until a year down the road when it's time to trim out the house. And by then, if there's a mistake, it's too late generally to address. So the Levitons are great, and they do have the smart capabilities. So you can buy the breakers and you can do load shedding. they're double the price of the standard Leviton breakers. So even though I think it's a cool technology, most homeowners just don't care.
Right.
It's not that big of a deal for them. So I don't know. I think that on most homes, we're still just doing standard breakers.
So with that breaker panel and the way that's terminated, do you guys like to go in after drywall to test things and make sure that like a screw didn't get put over a wire somewhere during drywall, or are y'all still kind of waiting until?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's just really not feasible. I mean, especially maybe in a small 2,000 square foot home you could do that, but in a 12,000 square foot home, I mean, there's thousands of wires, and if you've done a good job routing your wires and holding them up in D-rings and managing the wire correctly, and not doing a spider web, right? Like you walk into most homes and the wiring looks like a spider web, and that's not what it should look like. I mean, a well-wired home, the cabling should be straight and should turn 90s and should look like you would expect it, a professional job to look. And if you do that, you're less likely to have, to hit those wires with sheetrock screws, and if they've been held up away from the sheetrock. So I think we try to mitigate that as the wire's being run. Coming back and testing the wire is just really not feasible. And frankly, it doesn't happen enough. I mean, it's pretty rare that we have a wire that's broken. So, it's chasing a needle in a haystack, really.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about a kind of a well-wired and a well-plumbed house.
Yeah.
When you walk in and look at it and everything's just, it's neat and organized.
Right.
It's
and to your point, like no one
better.
sees it, right? I mean, it's behind the sheetrock. So I get it, but there's just something about it that just resonates with me. It just feels better. And I guess the other thing for me is that it communicates that somebody cared, right? So it may not necessarily matter, but it's indicative of someone that cared about their work and probably did a better job at a lot of other things they were.
It's indicative of the overall quality of the house being built. When you walk in and the plumbings and the wiring and the HVAC's just a rat's nest of stuff, what does that tell you about what's going to come in future phases?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't like that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about all I've got for you.
Cool.
I really appreciate you being here today and talking about this stuff. Just planning projects. I mean, we talk about this just over and over until I'm blue in the face. I mean, planning projects is just essential for having a positive outcome. And, the more people like you that we can get at the table early on is just setting up the client for a better chance of success.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, not only the client, but the whole team, right? I mean, we want to be part of a team where no one's allowed to fail. And so I think, the more planning we can do in advance sets the whole team up for success.
So tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find Wynne Walker Group.
Sure. Well, our website's wynnewalkergroup.com, WYNNE. And you can check us out there. And we're on Instagram a little bit here and there, but that's about it. Website and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, everyone just remember that quote that we already said, the quality of a home cannot be derived by appearance alone. I think I said that right, didn't I? Okay. So talk to Wynne if you want to help plan your project and help plan out that wiring. And I'm sorry, we didn't really get into the HVAC side of it, but do you guys get involved in the HVAC side of the design stuff as well?
I mean, not really. I mean, we obviously for the electrical side, we're going to, make sure that the specifications are right, matching up the wiring and breakers for the mechanical side. We're not building scientists like Toner, but we are aware of a lot of that type of stuff. And so we were on a job actually the other day that the house had 8 dehumidifiers that were installed, and we happened to notice that they were ducted backwards. Like they completely ducted the supply to the return and the return to the supply. And I called the company as a reputable company here in town, and they didn't believe us. They're like, "No, there's no way." I said, "Well, come out and look." And sure enough, they went out there and like, "Oh my God, we did." It was all hard ducted.
Yeah,
so they had to fix it. So there are times we are looking at other things when we're on these jobs, even though our scope really is electrical. We are looking for penetrations in exterior walls, and are those getting flashed correctly, and are there mechanical issues that might need to be addressed. So, that's not, technically part of our scope, but I think it's part of just being a good teammate. We're definitely looking for opportunities to help.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, got sidetracked on my outro there, but great addition. So anyway, thanks again for being here. Always
Thanks
great.
for having me.
Always great to see you. Hope to work with you again soon.
Sounds good.
All right, and thank you all for listening to this episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I hope to see you next time. If you found us helpful and enjoyed listening, please support us by liking and subscribing here on your podcast platform, and also join us on our YouTube channel. We want to continue to bring you high-quality content and expert guests, and your support truly helps us to continue this journey. If you have any questions for me or my guests, or any feedback for us, you can email us at podcast@yourprojectshepherd.com. Thanks again.